My name is Travis Evans, and I'm a sales engineer with Offsite Sync, a platinum Veeam cloud service provider, and one of the original Veeam cloud service provider launch partners. And co-presenting alongside me today is Brandon McCoy with Veeam. Brandon is a senior systems engineer in the VCSP division with Veeam. Brandon, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. Good to be here once again with you.
Yeah, always a pleasure. So the key takeaways from today's webinar will be effectively getting your data offsite, bridging the data availability and recovery gap, mitigating operational risk, and ransomware in 2021. And hopefully, as we discuss these topics, you'll leave today with not only an understanding of the best practice that is 321 data protection, but also ways to effectively execute strong data protection and business continuity. So Brendan, if you want to get us started with effectively getting data offsite and what that looks like in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So in terms of, the traditional kinds of backups where we're just really relying on a single backup, or maybe you do have a strategy for having multiple copies of your backups, a lot of the old methods involve things that are maybe a little harder to test, maybe just not the most efficient way to do testing, restore. We'll get into some of that a little later. So you might envision some local backup on a NAS or some other kind of Windows server, and then maybe your offsite is tape, right? And tape backups are cheap. They are air gapped, so they're secure. But when you have those backups for a long time, it's kind of hard to test those. It could be clunky to restore from those. And with the new backup methods that we have, so specifically using Veeam and ODS with what we call Cloud Connect, which we'll also dive into a little deeper here, that's going to allow you to have multiple backups and backups that are offsite, backups that are easily to be able to be restored from, and testing as well.
Yeah, and Brandon, one thing that we've kind of alluded to a little bit, it made me think of that expression, the old ways are the best ways. And sometimes that's true, but there are things like you talked about, features and functionality, ease of testing, or other things that maybe old or traditional ways don't really cover. And so that's where you do need a new way of doing things. And there's maybe even cost reasons or other things. But I also think of sometimes what's done from an older traditional way is because it's a legacy, it was easy. I think of stories where administrators will put data on USB drives and take those drives home, and just how scary and vulnerable that is and how risky that is and unsecure. And there's really, they probably do that because it's easy. And there's other ways now with new ways of doing things that are just as easy, if not easier.
Absolutely.
So what about recovery time and point objectives? Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So there's a couple terms that I talk about almost every day. And one of them is definitely RTOs, RPOs, or sometimes we just combine them into an RTPO. So that means your recovery time objectives and your recovery point objectives. So the difference between these, your recovery point objectives are how far do I need to be able to go back, and how much data do I need, or what are the times that I need to capture data in between backups, right? Do I need to have a backup every hour? So sitting down with your customer or your organization and, walking through, okay, if I lose data, but I only backed up yesterday, is that going to be a catastrophic failure? Maybe I need to be able to go back to every hour for, the last week. And then maybe I start to collapse those into weeklies, monthlies, yearlies,
right,
sometimes referred to as a GFS. And then recovery time objectives, that's going to be how quickly do I need to be up and running? These are more for your critical applications. You may have a few file servers and things that as long as it's up within 24 hours, you're okay. But then you have these tier 1 applications that you don't have any time to be down. You need to have these up and running in minutes. And so understanding the RTOs, the RPOs, and the costs and overhead with those is very important.
Well, and also, part of effectively getting your data offsite, especially kind of in the new ways of technology that afford us the ability to do that. I just think of not even that long ago, having aggressive RPOs or aggressive RTOs and doing that offsite was either very expensive or very hard. And it required either bandwidth that people didn't have available or just other resources that weren't available to them. And now with Cloud Connect and other feature sets that Veeam continues to introduce for Cloud Connect or for providers to leverage and be creative, there's ways to make it easy to where customers can effectively get that data outside of their four walls without having a dedicated facility or something where you maybe had to have dedicated bandwidth and all these other expensive resources.
Yeah, it's a great point. Just to add one more thing there, I think sometimes when we ask, how fast do you want to be up and running? How long do you want to keep your data? We want it all, right? We want to be able to go
Right.
back to the beginning of time. We want everything up and running in minutes. But as you said, with some of the operational costs involved with that, you kind of have to sit down and strategize that. And then with Veeam and Offsite Data Sync, there are a variety of ways to still achieve some of those short RTOs and RPOs with minimal overhead.
Yeah, and that's where too it can be a conversation based around really understanding your environment, your business needs, because really, honestly, not all data is the same. A domain controller or an Exchange server is probably more important than some other type of server, depending on what its role and function is. And so maybe some systems can come up in hours or days, whereas other systems might need to be prioritized. And so really, that's where we can work with you to meet any of those needs without sacrificing those business objectives.
Agreed.
So what about, let's transition to start to talk about data availability and bridging the recovery gap and all that.
Yeah, so as I alluded to, there's some topics that I talk about over and over. So this is another one. This is the 3-2-1 rule. So this means having 3 copies of your data on 2 different devices with one of those offsite. And some people extend this into like a 3-2-1-1-0 with like offsite, right, offline. I like to keep it simple. So the first copy of your data is actually not a backup. It's the production data itself. The production machines you're running on, whether it's virtual, physical. And then the second copy of your data is your first backup, which is on some sort of local disk with Veeam in most cases. And then that third copy on a different media and the one offsite is having an offsite backup, preferably in a Cloud Connect provider like Offsite Data Sync.
Yeah, and I like that you talked about keeping it simple, because you definitely, in my opinion, can't have too many copies. There's almost not enough redundancy and security, really. But it can be hard to remember or think about in terms of whether you're meeting compliance or business objectives when you do get beyond just the simplicity that is 3-2-1. But that does cover probably most use cases and things that are out there for sure. So let's start to talk about mitigating operational risk, because obviously that's a big part of this whole conversation with 3-2-1, because that's obviously where that falls within is really trying to have business continuity, have data availability, all that.
Yeah, so this is a great topic. Veeam is a great software, Offsite Data Sync, great data centers all over the world, right? But one big thing to consider is, there's always the chance that, just because the backup completed and there's a green checkbox, it doesn't mean necessarily that that data is good. So Veeam has something called Sure Backup, for instance, as well as Sure Replica. And basically, we're able to take the backup files and mount those in a fenced off production environment so that it's not interfering with production, rather. And we're able to do various tests. So some backup softwares, they give you a screenshot, proof of life. They show you, hey, I spun this up. Here's the login screen. Call it a day. Well, that's good. It's not really good enough. So Veeam is able to ping the machine. It's able to do a VMware Tools heartbeat test or a Hyper-V integration services check. And it's also able to check various applications inside and make sure those applications are healthy, and then send you or your customer an email to notify you about that.
Yeah, and before we get into a demo walking kind of through Sure Backup, you're absolutely right, where as we're talking about all these things with 3-2-1, data availability, data protection, having that peace of mind, just having it isn't the full picture. That's not the full solution. You're right, where really those things that you've trusted that you could recover from are only as good as the test that you run against them. And so having a picture that just shows like a Windows login, how many times have we tried to log into something that isn't running effectively, and just seeing that it booted up, like you talked about, having all other services and other dependencies, like is the network even there? All those types of things that are kind of a bare minimum, really, that, just a screenshot isn't really, it's some form of a test. So it's definitely better than nothing.
Sure. But
there's really better technology and better things out there that we can leverage to test so that we can have full validation, because I've heard stories where I think, several years ago, even the adoption rate of just having backups was still really low. So you kind of had almost like an 80-20 split. But then even of the ones like the 80% that at least had a form of a backup, you had within that an 80% that hadn't even tested or had no test or had never developed a plan or anything like that. I think that's thankfully because of Veeam and Offsite Data Sync both working and championing together things like data protection and 3-2-1. I think both of those things have gone down. And so now there's more people with good backups, but then also that they've tested them and have a true business validation around that they could recover in the event that they needed to restore something, or even in the event of a disaster.
Absolutely.
So let's take a look, Brandon, if you don't mind walking us through that Sure Backup that you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we got a little pre-recorded demo here, and I'll kind of walk you through what's happening. So this Sure Backup job is running. There's already been some initial setup, which is very simple. There's something called a virtual lab. And so basically we're just pointing to a host or a cluster, and we're creating an isolated network or VNIC for these machines to be spun up in. We're doing
like a sandbox, right?
Yep, absolutely, like a sandbox. And we're doing this. What's really cool is we're not having to rehydrate these machines and register them back to VMware or Hyper-V. We're actually just taking the backup compressed file, using some Veeam magic in the background, and we're able to spin those machines up without having them fully restored. So it's very fast, efficient in the background. As we saw, we were able to just ping those machines to know that they are running. We do see those machines in the vSphere environment, but it is not a fully hydrated machine. And the production machines, we assume, are still running. So this is just a copy of those machines that we can see, we can test, and know that those backup files will work when we need them.
Yeah, and it looks like it's pretty quick and easy. And like you said, it's contained within that sandbox. So if you do want to do more testing beyond just the kind of the built-in predefined test that we talked about, you can absolutely do more of those real world tests with that, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, not just the ability to ping it and do the heartbeat, but also to leave those machines running as if they were the true production machines, and maybe apply a bunch of patches before you introduce
Right.
that. Yeah,
Great
like
point.
the great Windows patches and
Right.
things like that. That we want to make sure that's going to be okay before we introduce that to production. And then as you see here, you're going to get an email notification to let you know that they're good, or if they're not good, at least you can get on top of that before it's too late, right?
Yeah, so then these are scheduled, and then you can just have your notifications or your ticketing system catch, warning or failed events, so that you can know not only about your backups the way we monitor and alert for those, but you can do that with testing like this as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, this is just for the backups. We see the report here of how long it took and everything that was processed. We also have this for full blown replication as well. And I think, Travis, later on, you're going to get into some replication specifics of DR testing. So it's so important to know the difference in both of those backups as well as, full DR.
Yeah. One of the things to get a little technical here is obviously this is a local test because it's dependent on networking that you alluded to and things that, because of Cloud Connect being so easy and how it works, there's not that networking component. But as you alluded to, we will get into testing that Offsite Data Sync provides and all of that. But what's nice is that customers can know that even if they're doing something like a backup copy job and they're reading those same backup files that the Sure Backup is running against, they can have a peace of mind and know that those are valid data blocks, and they can know that those same files are just being read, and then they can have total peace of mind around the, not just the state of the data when it was backed up, but if they ran tests against it, then when the backup copy job ran, that it's capturing good data as well, and have just basically start to finish, peace of mind around that.
Yep, I love that. That's a good point. Yeah, we're testing everything locally because of those network settings we alluded to. Once we know those backups are good, we have an identical copy at the service provider side.
Yep. And obviously there's health checks and things within the backup copy job, so you can validate that as well. But yeah, it's critical to know, because it often in calls and conversations that I'm involved in, customers do ask that about, well, if you backed up a machine and then also copied that, how can you basically kind of breadcrumb, follow along, just knowing that you've got valid data there? And that's a great way to do that by leveraging those Sure Backup jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So as we start to talk more about the partnership side of things with Cloud Connect, with Offsite Data Sync, because obviously we've focused a little bit more on just data protection in general, and then obviously Veeam with some of the feature and functionality, obviously Cloud Connect being a big part of that. One thing that comes to my mind, especially when as part of the conversation around mitigating operational risk, is working with a trusted and valued partner. Because obviously, if you just leave it up to your own devices or your own experiences or your staff limitations, there's a lot that can be at play there. So that's where leveraging a partnership is a great idea. And there's a lot on this screen, I know, but I want to direct your attention to really kind of three areas: trusted, experienced, and forward thinking. So first, trusted. And I don't think it can be overstated that the biggest part of working with a provider, especially in terms of 3-2-1 data protection, is trust. And in Offsite Data Sync, we've worked hard to gain the trust of our customers. I don't think that should be skipped over. I also don't think that can be said enough to where, because as we talked about, that one component, the offsite component, and how you do that, and doing that effectively, bridging that gap, and also mitigating your operational risk is going to require different levels of trust. And especially when you're working with a valued partner, the more you can trust that valued partner, the better relationship that'll be, and the better experience you'll have with your data protection journey, so to speak. The second thing is experienced. We at Offsite Data Sync are technology and disaster recovery experts. We support various sized companies with vastly different technology needs, as you can imagine, and complexities of anything you can imagine, from kind of one small headquartered site with a single server and maybe a couple terabytes of data, up to these large remote office type infrastructures with data and servers and a footprint size of hundreds of terabytes that spread even across the country or sometimes across the globe, because depending on the size of the organization. And we also strongly support several different industries, from those in healthcare or energy to those in manufacturing or finance. And so that's where, depending on what space you're in, you don't have to worry about, if you're partnering with someone, have they seen an environment like yours, or have they worked with companies similar to yours? And we've absolutely done that. Finally, forward thinking. This is kind of obvious, but I feel like it just goes without saying. Technology is ever changing. And that's where you need a partner provider that's always looking ahead, that's always adapting the latest and greatest technology. And we at Offsite Data Sync, we're right there with you in your journey. Veeam is as well. Veeam is always coming out with new features, new functionalities. And so we're always looking to how we can strengthen that relationship and partnership as well, and taking advantage of that and using those. I think of great technology like CDP that Veeam just came out with. And so forward thinking in that regard, to have very aggressive RPOs, right, Brandon? I mean, that's a great, that's what you want to see in any phase of a partnership, whether it's with a software provider or vendor, or with disaster recovery experts. Any of that, you want to make sure that that's prioritized, so that you don't wind up with a legacy situation to where it's something that becomes outdated quickly, because it's just such a rapid, ever-changing landscape. So as I've said a few times, as DR experts, one of the things Offsite Data Sync, one of our core and strong services, is disaster recovery as a service. And we believe that your solutions, as we alluded to earlier, are not complete without testing. So we alluded to Sure Backup, or even if you wanted to use Sure Replica locally, any of those types of technologies are definitely available. But you either maybe don't have the expertise in getting that set up, or you don't have the time or staff to commit to that. Maybe you have other projects or considerations. Or if you've just never tested or begun the process to have a DR plan, or maybe you do have one and you've tried to do it and you realize that's a big task, that's a tall order to try to have a DR situation to where you can have a fully vetted DR service. And we'll get still more here in a moment about testing, but as you can see, with this checklist, that's where you can really work with someone like Offsite Data Sync as part of that process, where when you're testing, whether it's your backups, some providers and vendors really stop at, well, hey, we're just your storage. That's really all we are. We even offer DR capabilities, and we'll provide testing with that. And also, your VM-based replicas. And we've made that easier than ever. So again, if you've tried to have a DR plan, if you've tried to do testing, it's probably a cumbersome task or one that you weren't able to do because of time or staffing constraints or maybe even budgetary constraints. And so for more information on that, please download our DR testing checklist at go.offsitedatasync.com/get-my-checklist. I think you'll find that a valuable, it's a one-page front and back or 2 pages document that kind of outlines that whole process. It's really easy, really straightforward to kind of give you everything you need to have peace of mind with your solution. Again, like we talked about, that it's a full, complete picture. Brandon, is there anything you'd like to add here about DR testing?
Not specifically. I think you really covered it greatly, but kind of alluding to this and maybe some of the previous slides, having a partner like Offsite Data Sync, you guys have the Veeam CE certifications,
Yep.
which for everyone's knowledge, that's something that an engineer at Veeam like myself is required to have. So these are service providers who not only are using the Veeam product to help you offsite and all that, but that they're actually Veeam experts as well and have been with Veeam for quite a while. So in terms of this, more advanced disaster recovery testing, I think it's important to partner with someone who knows Veeam inside and out like you guys do.
Yeah, that's a great point. So then again, as I talked about, like with the DR testing and part of that DR as a service conversation, really, this is one of the best ways you can mitigate operational risk. So you can do a copy of your backup, and that at least gives you something that's a great kind of foot in the door. It's usually budget friendly. It's like what, 5 or 6 clicks, Brandon, in Veeam to establish a service provider and get that cloud repo into Veeam and set up a backup copy job, especially now with the immediate copy mode where you don't have to worry about scheduling or any of that. You just link it to the job and you're off and running. But disaster recovery as a service, especially, really gives you that aggressive RTO where your machines are ready to go. And so by partnering with Offsite Data Sync as your Veeam cloud service provider, you can not only save time and money, because this can be an expensive solution depending on how you do it any other type of way, but you also have a better peace of mind knowing that your data and business are protected with, honestly, the best solution possible. So whether it's ease of use or needing a feature-rich offering, or it's just you're looking to partner with DR experts as part of your disaster recovery as a service implementation, or maybe it's just simply getting more out of your budget, disaster recovery with Veeam and Offsite Data Sync is honestly better than ever. Oops, double click there. So ransomware, the kind of the last key takeaway from today's webinar. Brandon, ransomware is still in this day, age, it's still the 800-pound gorilla in the room, isn't it?
It sure is, and we've done some other webinars that were really just specific to ransomware, and it's just amazing. Every time I do these webinars, I feel like eventually nobody's going to show up because everybody's already seen it. But there's so many attacks, there's so many new businesses, and everyone is at risk, right? Every vertical, every sector, from the small mom and pop shops all the way up to the financial sectors. There's been just to give you a couple of the newest attacks. A couple months ago, Office 365. A lot of people think that my data is safe because it's in the cloud. Well, a user or an employee was fired from his company and decided to delete 1,200 mailboxes before he left. They hadn't removed his access to that. So there's malicious employees. Microsoft Teams, there was some weird bugs in that was just deleting data on its own. So there's like IT glitches, and a lot of people have heard about the their most recent ransomware with the Coastal Pipeline, which made it hard for me here in Georgia to get some gas. Sorry, and I didn't mean to steal the thunder from this next slide, but
oh, you're fine.
It was a little tough for a few days there, man, and it just shows you how it can affect everyone.
Yeah, and really, you're right that it's truly in today's world with really any disaster. I mean, we've always kind of had, I think it's easy to have the mindset of this won't happen to me, or maybe as long as my company isn't in like hurricane zone or a flood zone, or maybe those traditional, natural disasters, tornado alley, that sort of thing. But really, especially with ransomware, that's a disaster event. And it's really not if, but when. And that's for any disaster. I mean, power outages and lengthy ones at that are common and can happen. And you can find yourself unavailable to offer your resources and whatever it is you go to market with to your customers or other businesses. You can find it'll be days or maybe even weeks before you're able to do that again. And it always comes unexpectedly, you know, whether that's power or disaster, or unfortunately ransomware can just almost catch us off guard, and we've got to stay vigilant. And part of that, you know, is having the effective strategy around like 3-2-1 and having data protection in place. And really, you know, the goal now more than ever is keeping your production data safe. And Brendan, you kind of alluded to even something like Office 365. You know, so of course, one of the largest adoptions for production data has been and continues to be people moving to Office 365 for things such as Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. And the reality is that there is a separation of responsibility. Microsoft is in charge of the uptime of the infrastructure, the platform, the product, so to speak, and they deliver the service. So they have all the security around that and everything. But you as the customer or the IT administrator, the data that resides within Office 365, that's your responsibility. You know, that's my responsibility. And it's our responsibility to protect it for things like long-term retention needs or compliance, or like you talked about, bad actors, or even ransomware that can encrypt an entire mailbox and within Office 365.
Yep. Yeah. You know, I remember a few years back when we were doing these ransomware webinars, and I found this really cool video, or I don't know if cool is the word for it, but an interesting video nonetheless, where this gentleman showed how a ransomware virus comes to an email in the form of what looks like Microsoft email asking
Right.
about spam protection. An employee unknowingly clicks it, and next thing you know, all their emails are encrypted, and you get an email asking for, you know, X amount of dollars in Bitcoin to be paid. So.
Yeah, and that really goes beyond. Yeah, I think I've seen that same video, and what kind of alarmed me about it is it's not like a traditional ransomware attack vector that, you know, it gets downloaded onto their machine, and then it just comes down to, well, what do they have access to, or something like that, which, you know, you've probably safeguarded that, but it just all stays and lives within Office 365, and so it'll encrypt their entire mailbox. And hopefully it wasn't a VIP user, you know, if you didn't have a backup or a way to recover that mailbox, or you know, or something along those lines, because that's very scary how quick and effective that is to attack that. And then this is also what we bring this up because Veeam does offer a backup solution for Office 365. So kind of going back to forward thinking, but then also us as Offsite Data Sync, we actually offer that Veeam Backup Office 365 as a service, where we actually take those APIs and present that to our proprietary customer portal, so that then you can establish a connection to Office 365, and you can then build out jobs, whether that's the entire organization, or you want to back up certain mailboxes or users or SharePoint sites, OneDrive, Teams, all that, which even the Teams is been added recently. So from both Veeam's perspective and ours, always adding whatever, you know, Microsoft introduces as a product or a feature, and then working with them to have that as a viable way to protect that data.
Absolutely.
So really, you know, it all boils down to, kind of in summation, choosing the right provider. It all comes down to really choosing the right product. So we've talked about Veeam being that right product, and then also the right provider. And we've talked about Offsite Data Sync being that right provider. And we believe that Veeam, in conjunction with the expertise and features of Offsite Data Sync, is really truly the best scenario for your 3-2-1 data protection needs and for your business continuity. Brandon, I don't know if you have anything you'd want to add about what it's like, you know, in that process, you know, to make sure you're always keeping a great relationship with the vendors that you use as a business organization, or, you know, that whole process of trialing and maybe even switching technologies if you are on a legacy product that's not Veeam. I don't know if you've ever run into any of that in your role.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head, but definitely, kind of as we have alluded to, we have lots of service providers that offer all different kinds of services, and some specialize in one thing more than another. But one great thing about Offsite Data Sync is the length of time that you guys have been with us, and the ability that you have to be a cloud as well as a service provider, and, you know, having those data centers, you know, everywhere to provide those services to customers is definitely important.
Yeah, and as you kind of alluded to there too, is even leveraging strong features within Veeam itself. So recovering even from your backups into our infrastructure. Not a lot of providers do that. And it doesn't come at a premium cost. So that's where it can be a great consideration for just about any business. So as we start to wrap up today's webinar, I'd encourage you to go to our website and download our new free ebook that's about backup and disaster recovery for the new world of work. So specifically 2021, post 2020 as well, all that's kind of in there. I found that it's a great read, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. And this is also a time where if there are any questions, we'll take any questions and answer them before we kind of wrap things up today. Thankfully, 321 is, like you talked about, Brandon, is a simple concept. So hopefully there's not a lot of questions there. And again, if you do have questions around Offsite Data Sync, I would encourage you to browse our website. You can engage with our sales team either through chat or through email, sales@offsitedatasync.com. And then our phone number, all that'll be on the next slide. We also work great with partners. So if you're an MSP or you have other customers that you'd like to provide these offerings to, we have a great channel there that we can work with you, give you great margins and things in those conversations. I'm happy to have those with you as well. So thanks everyone for your time and attention today. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for all your valuable knowledge and input. Again, this webinar will be available after today, and please go to our website to download the previously mentioned materials, the DR testing page, as well as the ebook. So Brandon, thanks again for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always fun.
Yeah, I totally enjoyed it. Thanks again for attending today's webinar with Veeam and Offsite Data Sync. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.